How are you doing today? This is Veil with Chain Veil MTG. Today we're bringing another deck tech from my buddy Caleb. Caleb here also is the place we play our games on camera, so big shout out to you for that.
Anytime.
What deck we playing? What building today?
Today we're going to go with my first commander deck. It would be Krenko Mob Boss.
Really? That's also my first commander deck.
He's honestly one of the best. He's definitely one of the most popular commanders out there, definitely for the amount of power he brings and the instant threat that he brings to the board state is really hard to argue against.
So what does Krenko do?
He taps for the amount of goblins that are actually out, on the field that under your control. So you basically just double the amount of creatures you have, which is very useful in this deck.
So what's your favorite card in the whole deck?
My favorite card, I would have to say, just simply for its sheer combo potential and what it can do and bring to the board state, and it's very underappreciated, is Skirk Prospector. He is the centerpiece of 90% of the combos and power in this deck, and people just look at him as a sack outlet and a mana dork. So he's not necessarily ever viewed as an actual threat. But if you see me play this, the game's about to end.
How many times have you said I exiled your Skirk Prospector because it got scary?
It can get scary, and it's whenever you point out how scary it is, I'm just like, well, you're not wrong.
Well, Shane used to play goblins. He knows my issues.
Yeah, but I have a couple of backups in here, and if I have a way to protect Skirk Prospector, then I typically will do what I can to get that out.
So you're building tribal. Let's see a lot of your lord effects. Like an MPG, a lord is a card that buffs other tribes, and Krenko makes so many bodies. I feel like your lords are super important.
The lords in this specific deck, I do have quite a few of them. One of my newest additions is Goblin Trashmaster.
Also,
it gives...
in my favorite art.
Yeah, it's a beautiful art. Honestly, I think they should do more arts like this for all creatures. But it was only in a secret lair, sadly. But it gives all your creatures 1/1, and it's a sack outlet to go ahead and destroy other artifacts on the field. And when in the board state with this that you can quickly achieve with Krenko, this is the best way, I think, to remove the artifacts. That and a Vandal Blast. Next, we have one of my favorite haste enablers, Goblin Chieftain. It basically gives all your goblins haste and another 1/1, and that by itself is phenomenal.
And with Goblin Chieftain, curve-wise, it's insane. It goes turn 3, you want to play Goblin Chieftain. Turn 4, Krenko with haste, and that's just insane.
It's honestly, especially if you're just doing the one and you don't have any mana ramp, being able to tap Krenko as soon as he comes out with this is honestly, it's unbeatable. Another one that is similar effect, but this one's just a little bit better in my opinion, would be Goblin War Chief, simply due to the fact that he reduces the cost of all your goblins, including Krenko himself, by 1 CMC. Of course, it's only a colorless, but the value is still there because if you can get this out turn 1 to 2, turn 3 you're playing Krenko.
Or in the same scenario, you play turn 3, turn 4 you play Krenko plus a different goblin.
Or you play Mass Hysteria for the haste enabler, but this one also gives it haste. Another one, this one is more or less a different way to play. You can basically use this if any of your creatures die. This becomes a threat. So people don't want to kill your creatures when this out because then you could just get to play the rest of your library.
It's also like the most red way to draw cards. The creature dies, so we're gonna impulse draw to get to this next point.
Yeah, and people do not want to let you have that ability because the fact that the more card draw you have in red, the quicker you're going to win the game. So they just try to get through that as fast as possible.
It doesn't help your commander goes infinite with like the kitchen sink.
It goes infinite with 90% of this deck, and it's honestly beautiful the way it's set up.
And I like to point out now is a good time to point it out. I run CDH tournaments in our area, and you got third with Krenko in a CDH tournament, and I played against you in the semifinals, and you beat us turn 1, player 1. Like, bruh.
Yeah, it can get scary. I think that was just luck of the draw. It was a 5-card combo, but even with that, I didn't have the card in hand, but I top decked the 5th card for the combo and was able to pull out a turn 1 win.
Which is insane. As a player who had a decent CDH deck I was playing that day, I'm like, well, Halo wins this one.
Yeah, it was definitely to prove a point that Tribal and Krenko itself in particular could stay in the same level of play as CDH decks. It's definitely fringe, and since then I've removed a lot of the pieces that made it more CDH. However, this is definitely a high-powered deck and should not be played in a casual pod.
So what you got to show us today? What other lore effects you got for us?
One of my favorites would be Goblin King. One of the best cards to pair Goblin King with is Blood Moon. Blood Moon, this is the secret layer. It's a little hard to read, but it turns all of the non-basic lands into mountains. And in a world of EDH or CDH, you will see virtually all decks are running non-basic lands.
Fetches, duels, shocks.
And with that, making all their non-basic lands into mountains and pairing that with Goblin King, you virtually will have an entire board that's unblockable for you to just go ahead and swing out as much as possible. And when you're buffing cards with things like Legion Loyalist, which gives everything trample and first strike as long as you attack with 2 or more creatures, which in this deck is virtually every time you attack. And that will go ahead and buff them up with other cards such as Coat of Arms, which is a very confusing card, especially for the entire board, but you give everything +1 for each other creature of that type that's on the board, and that's not just your board, that's the entire table. And it counts every creature type, so in situations like Goblin Soldier here, that will count for every soldier and or every goblin. And that is a beautiful thing to pair it with. Or if you can't have that in hand or you don't have the mana, you can play a 3-drop enchantment, Shared Animosity. So you pair that, everything gets a +1/+0 for every other goblin that you're attacking with. So let's say you have 10 goblins, they all get +10/+0. And with trample, first strike, and they are unblockable with such as Goblin King, you basically are swinging for victory.
I think what's really cool about Shared Animosity is it's a card that doesn't see a lot of play in tribal decks, but I've never really seen it perform bad in a tribal deck that runs it.
I honestly don't understand why it's not ran more. I feel like it's a card that has so much value for such a low CMC. Such as, let's say, if you run it in any type of tribal deck, vampires, squirrels.
Locust God?
Yeah,
It's scary in the Locust God.
Any type of tribal deck that has red in its cost. I feel like Shared Animosity is one of the easily thrown in the deck in the 99.
It's, for my opinion, it's in a red deck. It falls in the same category as Universal Automaton and Metallic Mimic because it's just that much of a universal tribal effect.
Exactly, and I think with the value that it brings, it's just a must. And another one, and this one is also part of one of the many infinite combos, is Hobgoblin Bandit Lord. So this is a lord in itself, just gives 1/1, but the second ability is where it shines. It taps for one red, but it does a damage equal to the amount of goblins that enter the battlefield this turn to any target. So let's say you don't have a haste enabler out, but you're able to go infinite with the amount of tokens you create. You basically tap this for, let's say you make 1,000,000 goblins, it does 1,000,000 damage. So let's say you find a way to untap Hobgoblin Bandit Lord with likes of Mage Right Stone. Mage Right Stone is it's also great with Krenko, obviously, because you can untap Krenko and keep retapping him. Or you can use cards such as 1,000-Year Elixir, which this also gives you your activated abilities haste. So that's something to look forward to. So if you can do that, and you have let's say a mana dork such as Skirk Outs, which again is part of most of the combos in this deck, you basically are going to be able to untap him and redo targets left and right. And that's something that brings a lot more value than people understand. Let's say they find a way that blocks all combat damage that turn. This is not combat damage. This is straight up direct damage, and you can kill their creatures, their any type of board state they have, or you can directly attack them.
I think my favorite setup for this is you go infinite. Player 2 is player 3 and player 4. I have Ghost of Prison, and you can't really afford mana to attack it for some reason. You go infinite, kill the other 2 with combat damage, and you go, oh yeah, you're not living through this. Tap.
Yeah, Ghostly Prison is definitely, when I first started playing this deck, I needed to find a way around that because a lot of people played that. And Hobgoblin Bandit Lord is definitely one of the sweet spots to get around it. Or if you can find a way to make him sack. But this one is definitely the mainstream, especially for a 3 CMC value.
And it boosts your goblins.
Yeah, and the fact that it also builds up the board state because it acts as a lord as itself is amazing.
Let's talk about your removal sources.
So one of the best removal sources in honestly any creature token deck but more specifically the goblins because of the thematics that you can get from the card, is Goblin Bombardment. It's really good in the fact that it has any target, creature or player, and it deals 1 damage for each creature that you sack to it. So if you can go with make 1,000 tokens, you just sack 1,000 tokens. You can do instance of damage to any of them, and because it's only 1 damage, it doesn't really hurt you with a deflecting swat, because that has hurt me in the past. Or
with your hobgoblin.
Yeah. So that is definitely one way to work around that. The next best one, I would say, and I think this is a card that should be in every red deck or even mono red in general because it's one of the best board wipes, especially in tokens, would be Blasphemous Act. Blasphemous Act acts as initially it's 9 CMC, yes, but it's more than likely you're going to be paying just the 1 for it, and it will do 13 damage across the board.
Which that kills a lot of creatures. And the cool thing was, like, let's say a creature has protection from something, or indestructible. Well, indestructible doesn't really work, so it has to damage. But let's say it has protection. Since it's a board wipe that deals damage, it gets around that, which is really cool. And what I like about it is, it's not 8 if your creature's for it to be the 1-drop. It's 8 creatures on the board, period. So if you're behind somehow, let's say you've been stopped and got behind, and another player's going off, you can still pay 1 mana, equal playing field.
Exactly, and it does hurt your board state, but all in all, you'll be able to build your board state up really quickly with this deck, simply because of how low the CMC of every card is. You'll be able to just recast everything. Krenko is 4 CMC, but there is enough mana ramp in this deck to go ahead and rebuild that board state up. And if you have Goblin Churgeon, you can actually regenerate half your board, and that will remove all the damage from Blast Act. So you will sack half your board, yes, to regenerate the other half, but you will still have a more dominant board state than the rest of the table.
So, with this on board, we'll say you have 4 non-token creatures and 4 token creatures. You're going to sack those 4 tokens to save the rest of your board, right?
Yes, correct. You will definitely want to sack the tokens instead of the non-tokens. Now, unless you're just feeling a little spicy about it, you can go ahead and sack the non-tokens, but I wouldn't recommend it. But yes, Goblin Churgeon is definitely good against any destruction board wipe spell, unless it's a Wrath of God or a Damnation, because they allow you not to regenerate those creatures. But for the most part, for a 1-drop CMC creature, it's one of the best the creatures in this deck.
And it's another free sack source.
Yes, the fact that it's as many sack sources you can get in this deck, especially with this low of a CMC, this card has more value in this deck than almost every other card except for Skirk Prospector and maybe Dockside. Next one, this one is a little bit harder for me to put in this deck. I'm still debating on cutting it or not, but it would be Goblin Chain Twirler. It is good in its own self. If you have a way to bounce it, then it's amazing. But it will deal 1 damage across the board to the creatures your opponents control and each opponent and Planeswalker.
I don't know about you. I remember with this card specifically, I played Standard at that time for a little bit there, and this card tore up Standard.
Yeah, it was, especially when it first came out, it was definitely one of the main central pieces in most 60-card formats, simply due to the power that it can bring to the board, especially only for a 3 CMC, and it's a 3/3 with First Strike alone. That it by itself is pretty decent, but the second ability, being able to do 1 damage each creature, and in a 60-card format, you can run 4 of these. And honestly, that's just mean. Yeah. But it's definitely one of the best ways to, if you don't need a quick way to deal damage to the board, or if you're
going into another token deck.
Yes, and if your opponents are getting a little hasty with their tokens, this is a way to slow them down. Another one, this one is a little bit harder to read if you aren't multilingual, but this is just Lightning Bolt. It's a staple in every red deck.
One of those iconic red cards of Magic's history.
Yeah, it's been reprinted so many times, but its value still remains. You will see this in play virtually in any region or format. It's a very good card, especially for this deck. It's just a quick removal. If somebody's playing a Drannith, this is a great way to remove it. Or if you see somebody trying to go off with, let's say, Thassa's Oracle, this will kill Thassa.
Well, this is the combo. Will it kill Thassa?
It'll kill Thassa, so it'll...
You send a message?
Yeah, you send the message.
Because, like, with your deck, I don't know, about your deck specifically. I know a lot of decks struggle to stop Thoracle combo, and because it's such a hard combo to stop outside of counterspell.
It is, which we do have counters in here, but it's counters in mono red are far and few between.
Well, they do stop Thassos.
They do. But it's definitely something that you need to watch out for. Another one, and this one is just a little bit more of a not something you can choose. You have to deal this damage. So whenever Pashlik Mons is honestly one of the greatest cards I think in this deck as well, especially if you pair it with likes of Goblin Bombardment. Let's say you have 100 tokens, you sack all 100 tokens with Goblin Bombardment to deal 1 damage. Well, whenever those creatures die, they also do an extra damage because of Pashlik Mons. So you're initially just doing 200 damage, and that's enough to wipe out either all the boards or even all the 3 players. So Pashlik Mons is definitely a go-to in this deck, simply for the value that it brings. Next one, and this one is also similar to Pashlik Mons, but this one's more of an ETB effect with Impact Tremors. Impact Tremors, obviously, whenever it comes in, a creature comes in, it just deals 1 damage. So Goblin Bombardment, Impact Tremors, and Pashlik Mons, you're doing 3 damage virtually for every creature token that you have, not counting combat. And that by itself is amazing.
It grinds out so much value in a game where Impact Tremors is a card where we sit here you play it turn 2. And I've sat there and been like, well, that has to be destroyed before I can do anything because it's just a machine gun through us.
Exactly. And the fact that they are virtually just triggered abilities, they are hard to deal with when in the likes of countering. You'll have to play a lot of removal just to get through that. And if you don't have the removal, then these 2 cards, or honestly any of these cards alone, are going to be enough to probably take 1 to 2 players at least out of the game very early on.
So we've talked about your damage effects. We've talked about your lord effects. What do you want to talk about next? We know you got a little bit of stacks in there, so let's go through that.
The stacks pieces, I am virtually a very heavily anti-stacks player. However, in the metas in today's world, stacks is very prevalent. So you want to play pieces that stop a lot of that and help your deck in the process. One of my favorite stacks pieces of all time is Blood Moon. It turns all non-basic lands into mountains. So all those dual lands, triomes, or more specifically sagas, are all stopped in their process.
Urza Saga.
Yes, Urza Saga is immediately you play this, and it's if this resolves, Urza Saga just is removed from the battlefield, and because of how the layering works, and that by itself this brings so much value. And since this is a mono red deck, this hurts you in no way.
There's a little bit with some utility lands that you have, but overall, I think that your opponents who are playing 2-3 color decks, sometimes with no red whatsoever, it's gonna landslide them.
Yeah, it just honestly it makes it because they tutor for those lands typically or fetch, and this just stops that from. It doesn't stop it necessarily from happening, but it stops their lands from being useful until they pull some basic lands. So this is definitely a go-to in most of my mono red decks. A next one, and this one is more. It just kind of stops the majority of CEDH decks, which would be Grafdigger's Cage.
Hey now, that stops Winota. I don't like that.
Yeah, I actually originally put this card in this deck to stop Winota, which is Winota just gets out of hand.
You
real
have
fast.
to. In our meta, we have Winota, we have Urza, we have a lot of high-end CEDH decks that you try to throw the deck in the ropes and compete with. So Grafdigger's Cage just had to go in.
Exactly, and then you have decks like Logan or Eugene's Chainer deck, which works strictly out of the graveyard. This just stops in its track because he doesn't run much artifact removal.
Because he's in mono black, he doesn't have much.
Exactly.
I remember there was one time he stopped playing it for a while because I think me, you, and a couple others all had it in our decks, and we would play it every time we went against them, which was fair.
Yeah, it's such a value piece for such a low cost. The fact that you can bring this out with like a strip mine or any type of colorless land is just amazing.
I was playing a game the other day where I cracked my Urza Saga and went and got it because it's a 1-drop.
Really?
And it's a lot of fun. You can get it off Urza Saga and it just
immediately just removes.
It can stop whole players.
Yeah, it can stop all decks. A lot of combos, looks like Spellseeker combos with some other decks. I don't know. This is just a very amazing card to include, and I feel like majority of your decks should be running it.
If your deck is not in the graveyard or does not pull cards from your library very often, definitely should be running Grafdigger's Cage.
Yes, 100%.
So you have more stacks pieces for us?
I got a few that aren't necessarily stacks pieces, but they're more protection pieces, such as defense grid. This stops a lot of decks from being able to interact on my turn. Since this deck doesn't necessarily run a lot of interaction that would be at instant speed, this is a way around it to make it where it's a more fair way for them to play, to stop all those mono blue players. Or
No free counter magic.
no free counter magic. This is definitely a way to stop it. 3 costs added to all of those spells is just a must, especially when you're trying to combo off. And you only have 1 counter in your hand on your turn. This is a way to help you to get that Tybalt's Trickery out if they do have a counter that they can pay for. And it's just a really high value piece.
Okay, so we got any more stacks pieces for us or protection pieces?
Another one, and this one is just more. This one isn't as useful as it used to be, simply because not a lot of people run a lot of creatures and go for combat damage anymore. But if you're running against a tribal deck, this is a must. Crawl space keeps people from having to attack you multiple times, or if you have a big enough blocker, it can stop a Godo deck from attacking you infinite times, which is amazing. You just gotta find a way to get that out, and it will stop most token decks because goblins, you'll be able to get 2 blockers out for sure.
Pretty easily. You tap Krenko twice, you have 2 blockers.
And and that's just with him on board. So crawl space is definitely a must to have in the deck.
All right, so we talked about your protection pieces, your stacks pieces, some of your lords. What's about the rest of the meat of the deck, your creatures?
So the creatures in this deck, I have quite a few of them. Let me. Yep. Hey, buddy.
Fuck you, Shane. You gotta edit this later.
That is the combo pieces.
Also, your dog has been like right here, and when I'm not petting her, like it hops, tries to hop in my lap. So I gotta pet some more.
Yeah, he is a slut for that attention. Okay.
Ready?
Mm-hmm. So the creatures in this deck, I run quite a few of them, simply due to the nature of the deck.
Goblins.
Gobos all the way. So one of the first we'll start with would be Siege Gang Commander. He brings a lot of value, especially if you have a Skirk Prospector out. He immediately gives you 3 bodies on top of himself the second he comes into the battlefield, and that in itself is amazing. He is also a sack source, but it's a little harder to do because he has that 2 costs to activate that ability, so we try to avoid that. We mainly use him to create bodies on the field.
I think one of my favorite interactions with Krenko is you go one of your hasty goblins, turn 3, turn 4, play Krenko with haste, activate him, turn 5, Siege Gang Commander, to make it that big push on the board.
Yeah, this is a very scary, especially if somebody doesn't think you have, like let's say you only have Krenko out. You play this the next turn with Krenko and then tap Krenko, you immediately go from 1 creature to 12 creatures, and that is in itself absolutely amazing. Especially if you have an untapped source, you can just re-tap Krenko, and it brings a lot of value, especially for this type of deck.
The amount of bodies it gives is truly pure value.
And then that's what most of these are, honestly, especially with like the likes of Metallic Mimic. I specifically like the art of this one because it has goblins, but it is a shapeshifter and it becomes a goblin once it ETBs. And for every goblin that enters the battlefield after that, you just put a 1/1 counter on it. And in a deck that you're just trying to build up you're basically goblin army. This is one of the best ways to do it, especially when you're tapping Krenko. Each one of those tokens will enter the battlefield with a 1/1 counter, so they instantly become 2/2s. And that in itself, I think this brings a lot of value.
It's a very good investment.
Yeah, especially if you can play this turn 1 with a Soul Ring, it's amazing. Another one, this is actually a different alternate art for Krenko, 10 Street Kingpin. Makari the Lucky Grot. He basically is the Krenko twin brother, except he doesn't tap for goblins, he does it on combat. Which in itself is good, and that it just builds up power and builds up the blockers that you have. And the fact that he is a 3 CMC, so if you can get this out turn 3 and then turn 4 the other Krenko, you're just going to be making an amazing amount of goblins in such a short period of time. It can get away fast. Another one that is a little bit more prevalent, and just because he's one of my pet cards, you'll see him in most of my decks, even if they're non-goblin related, is Squee. He's one of the greatest characters in all of Magic history, in my opinion. He is an immortal little goblin that has this little magical charm that is a little fluffy cat toy. And he can always be brought back from the graveyard, in some instances from exile. This one in particular is just good just in case you board wipe and you need something out real quick for a blocker. Let's say to try and stop that blight seal from doing lethal, you can find a way to just cast this real quick and it'll help protect you. Another one is Goblin Diplomats. Let's say you have a lot of blockers on board, but your opponents are getting a little bit scary, or with their creatures that are more or less stacks pieces, again with Janeth, and you want that removed. This is a great way to get them to be forced to attack with it, and that way you can block that Drannith or another opponent can, and it can be removed immediately. And this is a great way to force their hand on that aspect. Another one of the newer cards that's added would be Moria Marauders, simply due to the fact that you get the card draw. I haven't actually got to play this that much, but you get to look at the top card of your library, and you can cast that card whenever this goes for combat. And that in itself is amazing, and the fact that it has double strike, which is 2 cards off each combat, and that is a pretty solid value for 2 CMC.
So this is one of the few cards you got from Lord of the Rings that like just make your deck that much better.
Yeah, the Lord of the Rings set had quite a few things that were added to make value, and I definitely think Moria Marauders was instantly the second it was spoiled. That was one of the cards I was chasing after. Unfortunately, they didn't make a foil full art yet, but I'm hoping in the future that they'll change their minds on that.
Hopefully.
Yeah. And that is not creatures. Next one would be Goblin Engineer. This one, it brings a lot more value than meets the eye, simply due to the fact that it allows you to tutor for an artifact card. Now, the artifact card does go to your graveyard, but however, you can, with this deck, with the amount of artifacts you play, or things like artifact lands like the Great Furnace, you can go ahead and swap places with an artifact in your graveyard and your field. And the fact that it only costs 1 CMC to do that is amazing.
And then correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of your combo pieces that go infinite in this deck, there's a lot of artifacts in this deck that are combo pieces.
Correct. The artifacts that, especially that evolved around Skirk Prospect or any sack outlets, let's say we have the likes, my favorite one and the most prevalent because it allows you to do so many things, is Staff of Domination. If you have Skirk Prospector out with this and the amount of mana that you would create from tapping Krenko and untapping Krenko, you can gain infinite life. You can draw your entire deck, infinite mana, and you can just go crazy. You can tap all the creatures your opponents control, and the fact that you get all of that value from just 3 cards is wild
Insane
to me. You can be at the most dominant board state that you've ever been at with just this card alone, simply because of how much it can do. Now, let's say you can't get to that. Oh, and you can also tutor for that.
Off the Goblin Engineer.
Correct, and that by itself is amazing. And another one that goes a little bit harder to go a little bit infinite with is similar to Skirk, but if you have Staff of Domination but you don't have access to Skirk, you can play Ashnod's Altar, and that will also allow you to go completely ham with the amount of mana that you'll create, because with each goblin you sack, you get 2 colorless. And, well, all of the activated abilities on Staff are all colorless, so this just builds out up quicker. However, you won't have the... whenever you draw your entire deck, you won't have the colored mana until you play that Skirk Prospector, so you want to make sure to keep 1 red mana open just to cast that.
So my favorite card in your whole deck, I think is one that you talk about next, is Thornbite Staff. Would you mind explaining that one for me?
Thornbite Staff can be a little tricky at first. A lot of people actually don't know about it, which is crazy to me. But the fact, you can virtually just ignore the first part of that and just pay attention to its second ability. The fact that you can equip this to Krenko, and if any creature dies, so if you have a sack outlet or your opponents make the mistake of killing a creature, and now this isn't just your creatures, this is any creature on the board, it immediately untaps Krenko. And the second that happens, you just tap him again and double your creature tokens. Now, on each turn, because of how that ability works, you can just immediately keep untapping Krenko, and if you have a sack outlet on board, such as Skirk Prospector, or Goblin Turgeon, or any other sack outlet that this deck has, this will go infinite immediately. You just win the game. And that is a amazing value piece, and a lot of people don't realize that that's what this card does. Even if you sit there and try to explain it, because of how warty the card is, It can be a little confusing.
The card's got a paragraph, and this shouldn't have a paragraph.
Yeah.
It should just say, when creature dies, untap creature.
Be scared of this card if you see it out on the field.
His name should not be Throw My Staff. It should be Staff of Be Scared.
Yeah, be very scared. Yeah, this is a very, very terrifying piece when it hits the board. Next one, this one is less combo-y unless you can find a way to get infinite combats, which this deck does have with Shared Animosity. But Helm of the Host is a very, very amazing card to have in this deck, simply due to the fact that you can just create copies of Krenko and just keep retapping them because they have haste. Now, of course, you'll have to have multiple combats, but if you don't, you just have this once a turn. The fact that you can have 1 Krenko to 2 Krenko, 3, and you just keep retap each one of them.
After a few turns of that game's over.
Yeah, because you'll have thousands. It may not be infinite, but you'll have thousands to hundreds of thousands of goblins so quick that it's scary how quick you can get that out. So that's definitely one of the better artifacts in this deck. Another one, this one's more of a protection piece, and it also is a haste enabler, is Lightning Greaves. The fact that it has Shroud protects Krenko immediately, and the 0-cost CMC to equip is hard to beat. So if you play this turn 2 or turn 3, Krenko, next turn, you'll be able to tap them for free. And that virtually is one of the best abilities. Now, let's say you can't get Lightning Greaves out, but you still want Krenko to have that same level of protection. We have Swiftfoot Boots. Now, Swiftfoot Boots, it doesn't give it Shroud, but it does give it Hexproof, and that Hexproof is obviously better, but the fact that it costs 1 CMC to equip, it's a little bit of a trade-off. So it just kind of, whichever one you draw first, and you just got to work with the value they have at hand. Now, another one, and this one's actually a more recent ad because I got a full art version of it, would be Commander's Plate. Commander's Plate gives it protection. Now, Commander's Plate in a mono-colored deck is absolutely amazing. You can't really beat that value for the fact that it just protects your commander from every other color, especially blue players or white players. And it just protects him. Now, if you're playing against a mono-red deck, such as Godo or Bergi.
Or
Rionia. Those can be scary. But, I mean, you have other things to deal with those. This one in particular is simply for every other colored deck that will try to do damage to Krenko. With this out and equipped, you're virtually safe in the long run. And the fact that he also builds Krenko up by making him a 6/6 is pretty nice on itself. So it stops things like a lightning bolt against another mono red deck. So it's a good card to have in this 99.
So we've talked about most of your artifacts, most of your creatures. Let's talk about some of your cheap value cards. Cards that put creatures into the battlefield in unfair ways.
So definitely there's quite a few. Actually, there's actually not that many. There's only 3 cards that give me ways to cheat cards out, but the low CMC on these is absolutely amazing. Especially if you have a haste enabler such as Mass Hysteria, which is one of the cheapest ways to get haste in this deck. And it's scary because it can get the entire board haste, but in your deck, it's the scariest. One of the best ones and cheapest would be Goblin Lackey. Now, this one's getting a reprint soon, but this one basically, whenever it deals combat damage, you put a Goblin from your hand onto the battlefield. And that is amazing, because you have some high CMC Goblins, or if you have the Goblin Recruiter mixed with Muxus. Let's say you Goblin Recruiter, and then you go to combat and attack with this, and use Muxus, you win the game. That will virtually put out some combo pieces that just lets you go infinite, and that is absolutely amazing to have. Another one that's similar would be Warren Instigator.
Wait a minute. That's the same card, but it does it twice for 1 more mana?
It does it twice for 1 more mana. The fact that this has double strike, and a lot of people don't realize that when they first see it, is the double strike counts as 2 instances of combat damage, so you get to put 2 goblins from your hand onto the battlefield.
For free, and they cannot be countered. That's insane.
And it's such a great value piece, and this is actually how I won turn 1 within the tournament that we played. I played that with Goblin Recruiter and Conspicuous Snoop.
Yeah, so you have Mass Hysteria on board as well?
Yeah, I was able to Pyretic Ritual this and a Mass Hysteria, and it just gave this haste. I attacked, and whenever I attacked, I put down a Goblin Recruiter. That ETB triggers first, I tutored all the goblins on my library, put them on top in any order, and then I played Conspicuous Snoop, and the top card of my library was a Kiki-Jiki, so I just made an infinite number of them. Then I was the last when you copy Kiki-Jiki, create another copy of a Recruiter, ETB the rest of your goblins, make the top one Skirk Prospector, gives you infinite mana, and then you can just play your entire library.
I think in that game you did the Kiki-Jiki line, but you had a Impact Tremors like effect in your hand or on top through goblins.
The one that I had was a Mog Fanatic.
Yep.
Mog Fanatic is whenever you make that the top card, you can make all those Conspicuous Snoops copy of Mog Fanatic, and its ability is sack a creature, deal 1 damage to every any target, and you basically can just machine gun the entire board turn 1.
Yep. That was very serious to you. So we went through your free spells. I think we have one more to go through, don't we?
Yes. This one is a little bit older, but because it's only had 1 printing, but it's definitely one of the biggest value pieces in this deck. It would be Goblin Wizard. It's definitely one of the pricier cards in the deck. It's went down in price. It's only around the $60 to $70 range right now, but it used to be above $100.
I've seen it at the highest I've seen it was $150, and the lowest I've seen it is about right now. I've been playing Magic 5 years. You've been playing Magic longer than I have, and we both have watched this card stay up and not go down.
Yeah, and it's crazy to me that it's not been reprinted yet, considering how many goblins have been printed in Magic's history.
And I'm like 99% sure it's not reserve list,
which is insane. I just don't understand. But it's a good card. The fact that you can tap it to cheat a goblin out of your hand, or if you have one of those untapped sources in your deck or on the field, you can untap them and just cheat out a bunch of creatures, especially if you have Siege Gang Commander, which is a 5 CMC. You use this to cheat it out, you have 4 bodies on the field. And if you have Skirk Prospector out, you can immediately sack those 4 bodies, cast Krenko.
All right, so we've talked about some of your cheat out stuff. What's some of your tutors now? I know you have a couple of creatures and a couple of cards that tutor.
Yeah, so I had the card, let me get that pulled out here. I need to snap.
It's so much easier. Because that's why people clap before videos, so that's what, like when they have the little snap bar thing.
Yes.
That's why it's there. So the sound wave goes up, so it's easier to see. So, Goblin Matron, I don't think Naber's a tutor here.
It's not. I was looking at Goblin Matron, Goblin Engineers.
We already talked about Engineer.
But I'm looking for Gamble.
Gamble's right there, I see it. Next to Maximus.
My God.
And you also need to talk about the cards in here. Wait.
I've talked about those.
Imperial Recruiter.
Imperial.
Not Imperial, but
Goblin Recruiter.
Yeah.
Yes.
So let's move the cards we talk about over here. That way we can start like seeing where we're at.
Yeah, some of them I will go back to for sure.
So once you want to go back to, we'll put somewhere else. But like cards I talk about, we can move them out. That way it's easier for us.
Yeah. All of these I think we're good with.
What's really cool about how like this editing process works is, by us doing this now, I'm making editing notes for us ahead of time. Which is nice because I've not stopped this recording since we started.
I mean, if it works, man, go for it.
This software's been a lot of fun. So, what do you think about that Grenzo reprint?
Dude, it looks so sick. I'm happy that he got one. He needed
Finally.
it. But the issue I had with it was the fact that Krenko didn't get one, but he did. And I get it. Grenzo's a high played card, but
It's not though. Krenko sees more play.
Yeah, 100%. I just don't understand why. And Krenko was technically getting a reprint, yes,
but not in the cool art.
Yeah, but not in the cool art, and that's just like,
come on.
Breath of Fury. That's infinite. That's infinite, and that can be infinite. That's also another untapped source.
So not engineer. You want to talk about engineer again?
I'm gonna start with that, like we've already talked about in Goblin Engineer,
Okay.
but then
I'm gonna try to make sure we're all on the same page.
That's
Is that how good to go?
Yeah. Technically Krenko is, but he didn't necessarily throw him in the box.
Yeah, the reason why I was going to do this is that way because I noticed when you look over, you're like, what did I talk about? Like you look like, where's
Yeah. That it helps a lot.
Then
for sure.
crawl space. I think you talked about these already, haven't you?
Yes, and Blood Moon.
That's the bottom of the pie. I couldn't grab my finger and it went like bend it.
And I don't really need to talk about these again.
So tutors.
These are mana sources. We'll keep those there.
Move Gamble to here is because it's tutor, right?
Yes, and this
then
is a card draw
Goblin
source.
Recruiter.
This is a combo that I need to. Well, we already talked about this, honestly. So Recruiter.
And Kiki needs talked about. Cause I know you mentioned it. You're good. We talked about it just now when we talked about your win.
Yeah.
So good there. When to change his card draw.
Double Trickery, Chaos Warp, that's just removal. That's a combo for board wiping, which I should probably do that soon, so we'll put that there. These are just kind of values.
Minecraft, I'm not sure. I'm not the biggest fan of this list in general, but I get why it's in there because it's mill. And I don't like mill. I don't like being milled.
I literally have it in there simply because a lot of people will make their own life total go down. This is just loss of life.
And then throwing the God Pharaoh, that card is such a good in that list. Have you heard the card Burnt the Stake by chance?
I have.
So when I had Krenko, I had Burnt the Stake in the list. I killed somebody with Burnt the Stake and tapped enough creatures down with it to kill the rest of the table with throwing the God Pharaoh.
And that's
Sorry, so we have this pile here of tutors.
And then this, and then obviously the lands, which I don't think we need to talk about basic lands necessarily.
And then, so we can talk about card draw, interaction.
And then this is just like a value.
So finisher?
It can be, yeah.
So finishers, ramp, non-basic. Okay. And
so some of the tutors we have in this deck, we've already seen the likes of Goblin Engineer, which allows you to tutor for that artifact. Now, we have more prevalent ones. Let's start with one of the most famous tutors in Mono Red. That would be Gamble.
AKA Red and Tomb.
Red and Tomb all the way. Now, this one, of course, like it in the namesake, it is a gamble. You may give away that card whenever you do pick one at random. But it is definitely one of the best card draw tutors that you can have because it goes straight to your hand. So if you can tutor for this, you have that combo in hand, and this is not the card you tutor for is not the one that is discarded, then you just have the game. So it's definitely one of the best value pieces to have, or if you just need that one thing in your deck, this is the best way to get it out. Another one would be Goblin Matron. This one is really, really handy because it allows you to search your library for a specific Goblin card. Now, there's a handful of cards in here that you may need to look for. Let's say you have the cards you need in hand, but you need that Skirk Prospector. Or if you know a board wipe may be coming, you want that Goblin Turrican. This is a great way to get that out for just 3 CMC. Now, my favorite card to tutor for, though, with this one, it's kind of a weird situation because you're tutoring for a tutor, but it would definitely be Goblin Recruiter. This, by far, is one of the best tutors in, my opinion, in all of Magic, simply because you're tutoring for every Goblin card in your deck.
You're tutoring for a win con pile with cards that you have already on the deck. With Goblin Recruiter, you can set your deck up to just be a win con.
Yeah, you just draw. Let's say you didn't even use the conspicuous Snoop combos that you have with this card, and you just draw the top of your deck one card at a time. You know what you're drawing. You know what you're getting. You know what value you're getting.
You chose the order. You know what's coming. You're set up pretty well.
Yes, and the fact that your opponents also get to see it, they kind of get to see what the inevitable about to happen. This is definitely one of the best ways, especially if you have a card draw like Muxus out. You cast this, you play Muxus, you win the game. That's just basically what it does, and it's definitely one of the best cards in this deck, especially for 2 CMC. And I am so happy it's getting a reprint soon.
Value.
So much value. It's needed a good one in a while, but this is definitely one of the best cards in this deck. Next one, this is a more, it's not necessarily a tutor, it's definitely one of the best ways to board wipe, in my opinion, but specifically focuses on creatures, and it's a targeted removal, and it's just really funny the way it's set up. So one of the coolest cards, I think, as a Goblin is Goblin Sharpshooter. The way it works is it deals 1 damage whenever you tap it, but it untaps whenever a creature dies. So basically, if you can find a way to, I don't know, give this Death Touch with the likes of Basilisk Collar, it basically becomes the Goblin John Wick. It goes through and it starts shooting every single creature on the board, and you just keep tapping it, untapping it, killing every other creature simply because it has Death Touch. And in process, you just gain a bunch of life from it. And that's why Goblin Sharpshooter is definitely one of the underappreciated cards, in my opinion, on this list, because a lot of people don't realize. They just look at it as a 1 damage outlet. But if you give it Death Touch or with another source, or if you have a stack outlet, this is definitely one of the best ways to just board wipe the entire game.
Correct me if I'm wrong, it's also another way where once you get that sack switch that goes into Krenko, it's also a way to kill the players without combat damage.
That is correct, yes, because it doesn't have to target a creature. It can target a player. And that is amazing because of the fact that you don't expect that from such a odd card.
The little engine that could.
The little engine that could. It's definitely one of the underdogs in this deck.
So let's put some of your ramp next, because we all know in Magic you have to ramp a bunch to get to places.
Yeah, so with the ramp in this deck, there's a lot of the value cards from the actual mana itself. Let me see here.
Before you start again.
Yeah. Oof.
Oh. I turned to look at you earlier and my neck cricked up. I'm like, Shane, don't cut it. Fight through it. Fight through it. Fight through it. And oh yeah. Stretch it out. Hey, you're doing good so far.
Oh yeah.
Also.
What time is it? 2:09.
We have a 49-minute long recording and I have to edit down.
Oh, they're gonna probably be like, that's okay.
They knew we filmed Deck Tech first.
Yeah, we'll be there. We'll just sort of mess up more running late.
You ready?
Yeah. So we'll start with the lands in this deck. There are some lands in here that I believe are must and that don't seem like a lot of value at first, but they can add up really fast. One of the first ones we'll start with is Sandstone Needle. Now it enters with 2 depletion counters on it, and it does enter tapped. So let's say you play this turn 1, you don't have any mana that turn, you pass. But the next turn, you play another mana with this, you will have 3 mana because each depletion counter on this equals 2 red mana. And that, I believe, is value that is underappreciated due to the fact of how fast that can ramp up. Because 3 mana in this deck, you play that Goblin Matron, you got your Goblin Recruiter in hand. And then next turn, you play that Goblin Recruiter with this, and then you basically just top deck your entire library, and that's a great value piece in itself. Another one, this one is similar but not as powerful, would be Crystal Vein. Now, the fact that this doesn't ETB tapped is crazy to me, and the fact that it also taps for a colorless is great. Because you can tap this and sack it for 2 colorless mana at any point. And that is amazing value for such a cheap card. This one in particular is the foil premium deck series one. However, it's still very cheap. You can get this for less than $1 most places. But the fact that you can get that and get that sack outlet for just 2 colorless mana is amazing value. Another one, and this one is a little bit more well-known, is Treasure Vaults. This one just adds to, if you have a way to get a bunch of mana out, let's say you use Skirk Prospector to build up your goblins and you want to make a bunch of treasure tokens that you can use at any point in the game, this is a great way to do it. Or if you know that board wipe's coming, sack your goblins.
I also like it with Astron's Altar. You can do it in a way where you go infinite with the same prospect as Skirk Prospector, but you don't have that colored mana. With Astron's Altar, you can use that colored mana to turn into red treasures for red mana.
Yeah, and that it's an amazing value, especially for just the fact that it's just land and it doesn't ETB tapped. Now, the non-entering tap lands is honestly the best way to go. Unless it's a Triome, that's the way to do it. Now, there are more value pieces when it comes to mana ramp in this deck. A lot of rituals. One of the first ones we'll start with, and this is a great one drop. It's also really good in 60 card formats, but in Commander, it's definitely one of the most playable cards. That would be Rite of Flame. The fact that you can get 2 mana on that is just absolutely amazing. You can do that turn 1. You can play that Goblin Recruiter turn 1. You can play that Skirk Prospector, that Warren Instigator turn 1 with this, and that is by far amazing. Fuego all the way. And then let's say you have that in hand, but you also wanted a little bit more mana that turn 1. Well, then you got Pyretic Ritual. Pyretic Ritual adds 3 red mana. You can play Warren Instigator and that Mass Hysteria. And let's say you have things like a Goblin Recruiter and a Conspicuous Snoop in hand. You just win the game. You just win the game that way. And it's a great value piece in itself. For you guys that wonder why I turned it looking like that, is it's bringing back some tournament memories. Yeah, that PTSD can get really, really severe when it comes to that.
Well, you've seen it once, and I remember in that tournament, you pulled it off, and we had just started the round. We were, probably 5 minutes in the round, and then we go, yep, Caleb wins this one, and everyone looks at us like we're crazy, and I'm like, yeah, he won turn 1, player 1. We couldn't do anything about it. Yeah, goblins, whenever you get like a turn 0 play virtually like that, goblins can take off really fast, and a lot of people just don't expect goblins to be able to do well. So I think it's definitely at least fringe most occasions, but you can easily push goblins to the CDH. What I like about it was like that turn 1 when you pulled off was in the semifinals. So like you punch your ticket to the final four to try to fight for the turn, win with a explosive. Just one explosive turn is all you needed.
One explosive turn is most of the time you can get those with this. Now, so most of the time this deck is a turn 2 to 4 win. However, if you really get that nice hand just out the get go, you can get turn 1 to turn 2 easily. Now, another one in this is a staple in every single commander deck, and I will argue that till the day I die, and that would be Soul Ring. It is such a high value piece. It's popular. It's been reprinted so many times in Magic history.
It's such a good card that it's banned in multiple 60 card formats. And while I know a lot of us don't play French Commander against one-on-one Commander, it's banned in French Commander.
And in a way, I understand why. It's just such a good value piece, but it's basically mana crypt that doesn't hurt you. And now, of course, it doesn't cost 0. It costs the 1 CMC. But turn 1 Soul Ring is one of the biggest threats you'll see at any table.
You play turn 1 Soul Ring, I'm probably swinging at you turn 1.
Yeah, you'll probably scoop. Just scoop. And then, of course, one of the best mana ramp spells in this deck is Brightstone Ritual, which is one of the best value mana ramp pieces in this deck. Simply, let's say you have 100 goblins out. You're not even 100. You have 10 goblins out. You can tap 1 mana, and you get instantly just get 10 mana. And that is amazing, especially at instant speed. And you need that. Let's say you don't have enough to pay for that Blasphemous Act. You can also use this to pay for that. Or you don't have enough to cast Muxus, or you don't have a way to cheat it out. This will get that out of your hand. And that is definitely one of the best mana ramp spells in this deck.
Alright, so we talked about your ramping. Let's talk about your limited card draw.
So the limited card draw, we did have things such as Grenzo, Havoc Razor, and of course Rundevelt Horde Master. But for more card draw in specific, we have things such as Winds of Chains. Winds of Chains is definitely one of the best hands. Like, let's say you mulligan down to a 5-6 card hand, and you don't want to have to keep going down, but you see this in that opening hand. Well, you don't have to mulligan again. You just wait till your turn and cast this. That's also amazing if somebody is really happy about their opening hand, one of your opponents, because this forces them to discard that hand, well, not discard, but shuffle it all back into the library and draw another fresh hand.
I was playing a game the other day with Winds of Change, and I was playing my Wheel and Deal deck, and I went, turn 1, I went down to 4. I had Winds of Change, I went land, Winds of Change, and the guy next to me turn around hadn't had a turn yet, had a scary turn 2, almost turn 3 win, and he shows it, shovels it back into his library, and it was awesome.
It's definitely, it can make some people salty, but it's such a good value piece for 1 mana. It's basically a wheel that just gets you your hand back, but maybe you get better hand the next time. And I think it should be played more than it is. And as far as things as card draw, there's not too much in here. There's just things such as Grenzo. Now, this doesn't draw cards for you necessarily. This draws cards from your opponents. And playing your opponent's cards can be mean, especially when you look at those Atali players. But you do have Grenzo here, and he does play. Now, you have to pay for him. But let's say you have Skirk Prospector out, or again, that Brightstone Ritual. This is the best way to go ahead and just play their cards. And if they don't like that, then you can just goad their creature. That way, if they have, let's say again, that Drannith out, this forces that Drannith to attack.
Man, I don't know what it is, but you really don't like Drannith, do you?
Drannith is such a good card. Just such a good card. Very loved across the community. So, yeah, I just feel like Drannith just needs to... I feel like he gets lonely and wants to attack sometimes, so we'll just make him attack.
So, as a guy, I play a lot of Winota, as you know. But it's weird, I still do understand why the call for the Drannith ban is.
Yeah, I was shocked that they didn't. And I do understand it, but I was still a little shocked that they didn't.
I think if it wasn't a mono white card, it'd be banned. I think if it sat in, like, red.
If it was red, I would be playing it. But sadly enough, I don't get to play that. Now, let's say you don't want to play the cards from the top of your opponent's library, but you want to keep playing their cards. Let's go ahead and play Treasure Nabber. This allows you to take their little soul rings and mana crypts for yourself.
This little freak-on toy, this came out in like Commander 2018, and it got reprinted recently as well.
Yep.
But it was like, oh, and what's funny, like I'll point out in the art is, in the art, it's holding a soul ring. This card was designed with the idea of, let me borrow that soul ring for a second.
Yeah, and let's say you're the last in turn order, and you can find a way to, let's say you Pyretic Ritual this out of your hand, or you're the first in turn order, or whatever way, you just get all of your opponent's mana rocks immediately. Now, of course, you don't get treasures or Lotus Petals because they sack themselves. But
Mana Crypts,
Mana Crypts, Mox Diamonds, Mox Opals, Chrome Moxes.
All the good Mana Rocks, or Command Spheres, so many good ones you can get with it.
Yeah. Now, especially, this is where it gets a little funny. If you can get those under your control, and then let's say you have Goblin Engineer out and you want to sack some of those artifacts, after you've tapped them for mana, it's a great little way to make your opponents really happy with you. So this is definitely one of my favorite goblins in this deck. And then, of course, you can do Goblin Welder. Again, it's similar to what you can do with Goblin Engineer if you have some of your opponent's artifacts. You just use this to swap those artifact places with something in a graveyard, and you just get the artifact from your graveyard back, but they also have to lose their mana rocks in the process. But they're just helping you play your deck because they're all your friends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We love playing Magic with our friends. So let's talk about your limited interaction you have left over.
So limited interaction, obviously we have one of the best mono red counters, and that's Tibble's Trickery. It's just a great value piece to have, especially when you're needing something quick and to stop that blue player from going off on your abilities.
Mm-hmm. And you have what else?
And then this is one of the best permanent removals in mono red, and one of the only permanent removals, rest in peace, for mono red, and that is Chaos Warp. It does target a permanent. What's really crazy about this is that you can use it on a land as well. So if you just want to be mean to someone, you can focus a land. I wouldn't recommend that because they probably will stop being your friend.
Time out. Aren't you the one that strip mine a land turn one?
Well, look at the time. And it's definitely a go-to and staple, I believe, in virtually all mono red decks.
For sure. So we have a few more cards to talk about, so we're going to let you talk about them in any order you want to talk about now.
All right. Well, let's start with one of the it's a good card to have in a token deck. I believe it should be in most token decks, and that would be Eldrazi Monument.
Yeah, it's really good.
Giving all of your creatures 1/1 flying and indestructible is just unbeatable. It in itself, it acts as a Lord artifact, and it's not an equipment, so it just affects the entire board, and that is by far one of the best value pieces that you can have. Another one would be, it's a newer addition, is Sting. Now, Sting here, the Glenfield Dagger, allows you to untap Krenko at the beginning of every combat.
And it gives haste.
And that is absolutely amazing. The fact that every combat for your opponents, every time you just make blockers. And that is just...
And in one rotation, the amount of goblins you're going to make in a 4-person pod is...
It just... chef's kiss. And next one, this one it can go infinite if you have enough bodies out and you have Skirk Prospector or another mana rock of some sorts, is Aggravated Assault. This gives you infinite combat steps and infinite main steps, and it untaps Krenko every single time. However, the cost for it is a little high to activate, but if you can find a way to do that, or find a way to copy that ability for 2 mana, then you're just basically going to be winning the game with infinite combat. Now, speaking of infinite combats, one of my favorite and cheapest infinite combats is Breath of Fury. In Krenko, this is a must. You basically untap Krenko every time one of your goblins does damage. Now, you do have to sacrifice one, but sacrificing one of 100 is not a huge issue, especially when you just reattach this, attack again. Now, the only issue is this has to do combat damage. But if you have somebody that doesn't have blockers, again, mono blue, or sometimes graveyard decks that play from their graveyard, that doesn't have any blockers out at that moment, this, you just attack them, deal a bunch of damage, or if they have trample with Legion Loyalist, you can just
win the game.
And of course, one of the newest and most staple-esque cards in Magic would be Dockside Extortionist. The card speaks for itself. Create a bunch of mana really fast and use that to play your library. This is such a good card all around, and the fact that it's a goblin in itself just adds to its value.
So I know in some decks like that, tribal type does matter, and it's kind of a downside. And in Krenko, there's no downside to dockside because it's a gobbo.
It's a goblo. Gobbo, you can bounce it. If you can find a way to bounce this, it's infinite. And the fact that in itself you can use it as a sack outlet, because once it's on enter the battlefield, you just sack it as for one of your sack sources, and it's a great card. It's a body to build up Krenko, and the amount of mana it can produce is scary.
Especially in our pods.
Yeah, because our friends love to play sagas.
We play a lot of like high power CEH decks, and I feel like with Dockside, the higher up you go power level wise, the more treasure you get off of it, the more like, hold up, this card's broken it gets.
Yeah, you always want to be scared when one of your opponents asks, how many artifacts and enchantments do you have?
My answer is, why do you ask? Do you have Dockside?
Because it's definitely one of the scariest questions, because you know what's about to happen.
You're about to get Docksided for a bunch.
And then, of course, one of the best card draws in this deck is Skull Clamp. Skull Clamp allows... So, the way it's printed, it was actually by mistake. That minus on there was actually supposed to be a plus.
They thought the +1/+1 made it too strong, and then in hindsight, no.
No, they just made it better.
The +1/+1 would have been fine.
Yeah, so the fact that it kills your goblin immediately, just immediately 2 card draw from it, and the fact that you just have to re-equip it for 1 every time, and it's 1 color. So let's say you have that Ashnod's Altar or Skirk Prospector out. You can have a way to have infinite mana, infinite card draw, and it's just a great value piece. Last but not least, we have a bunch of utility lands. We have things such as Mad Blind Mountain. Allows you to shuffle your library, and that is amazing. Now, a lot of people don't play it because it enters the battlefield tapped, but I think it's definitely one that needs to see more play.
Especially when you have a Goblin Recruiter in the deck. There's situations where you recruit for the best pile possible. Well, I play a card that changes what the best card possible is. You need to shuffle that pile away. I think, especially in a deck like that that's set at the top very often, is very good to have.
Yeah, and it's an amazing value piece, especially if you are just drawing nothing but lands, or if you're drawing nothing but creatures or nothing of value. This is a great way to just go ahead and get yourself a fresh shuffle and see what you can get. Next one would be Hammerheim. It's an older card. I feel like it needs to see more play than it does, but it's only had very limited printing, so I can understand a lot of people not knowing about it. But it removes all land walking abilities from a target creature. And that is unbeatable when it comes to value.
It stops, like, let's say you're going at the Voltron deck that gives Mountain Walk. You can go, yeah, I can block your stuff.
Yeah, and it just, the fact that you can remove that from a Voltron deck, I don't know, I keep bringing up Godo, but he's one of the best examples, especially if he has that land walk or non-basic land walk. This just removes it, and that is an amazing value piece. Now, another one that is a mainstay in most tribal decks, or most decks in general, is Cavern of Souls.
Especially in today's world where we've got a decent number of reprints in the last few months, and it's definitely helped a lot seeing more of it.
Correct, and I'm glad that you just got the Glittering Caves reprint from Lord of the Rings set, but all in all, it's one of the best cards. It just stops that blue player from being able to counter your creatures the second you try to play them, or you try to cast that Dockside. This stops that from being countered.
Yeah, you're on a monocolor tribal deck, so the second half it's more for not countered. But what's cool about in more than one color tribal decks is it says, okay, I'm color picking for whatever tribe you need me to be.
Correct. Yeah, and 1 mana of any color is honestly something that is very useful. I do overlook it because of the monocolor deck, but it is definitely a must for this card. That's why I think its value has maintained as high as it
sees
has.
playing in so many formats besides Commander.
Another one that is one from the Lord of the Rings set is Helm's Deep, which is just Shinka, the Blood-Soaked Crypt. And it is honestly one of the best lands in Magic for Mono Red. It gives, I believe, first strike until end of turn. Yes, first strike for 1 mana, and it does an ETB tap, so you can just use it as that red source.
Especially your Krenko 10 Street Kingpin has to be legendary, it has to give it to. Your Krenko 10 Street Kingpin may be fragile, but giving it first strike makes it a lot harder to block.
Yeah, especially if they have that Death Touch creature that they were just planning to use. That is a great way to get around that. Another one would be Castle Embereth, which is a great way to give your creatures +1/+0 until end of turn for 3 mana. Now, it's a little bit less played for that because of how much other powered up cards that you play to build up your goblins. But if you don't have anything that can build up your goblins, but you need something to just get them that little extra damage, this is a great way to get around that.
Especially since the cannon are untapped. I think that's what matters, is that it's never just dead, because it says unless you control a mountain, so it enters untapped pretty often.
Correct. Now, this is one of my favorite lands in this deck because of how much I use it and the ridiculous ways of which I use it, would be Strip Mine. It is definitely a great add-in to most decks. The fact that you can just target removal of lands is absolutely amazing. And even if you don't use it for that, it taps for a colorless and it doesn't enter tapped. So this is one of the best value piece lands in this deck, and I think it's definitely a mainstay. Another one that's similar would be Command Beacon, again with the same Galaxy Foil treatment. Command Beacon, let's say somebody's removed Krenko 4 times in a game, and you just don't want to have to pay that mana to recast them. You can just use Command Beacon to move it to your hand.
Or if you're under that Drainus Stacks board where you can't play Krenko.
Ooh, yep, yeah, that is also another way to get around that. This does easily get around Draineth, so definitely another mainstay in this deck, and most decks in general. Command Beacon is a must. Now, Valakut's The Molten Pinnacle is a very great card because it basically, if you have the lightning bolts for every mountain that you play past 5.
Former modern all-star.
Yeah, and it's unbeatable in some ways or aspects. However, getting to that 5 mountains is a little bit harder than it sounds, simply due to the fact that you're playing a lot of non-basic lands most of the time. But if you can have some that have that mountain in the card type, or you just have a lot of basic lands.
Or you play Blood Moon.
Or you play Blood Moon. That is definitely another way to go around that, and it's a good card to have. Of course.
Wait a minute, no, Blood Moon doesn't work there.
Well, it is ETB tapped, but if you have a basic land and
but
you
if
have
it's
5
Blood
mountains,
Moon, it loses its ability.
Yes.
We're gonna cut that out.
Or we keep that in.
Ooh. Depends on video length.
That's true. Another one that was printed in the Lord of the Rings set is the Mines of Moria. And this is a very interesting card because it has an ETB unless you have a legendary creature. There's quite a few of those in this deck, so this usually doesn't enter tapped. And the fact that you can basically exile 3 cards from your graveyard and just create treasure tokens. You're not playing a lot from your graveyard with this deck. So your graveyard doesn't matter as much, and you can just create treasure tokens if you need the mana source quick.
You can build up your later turns with cards you no longer have access to, which is really neat.
Yes. Now this one is a lot better of a card than meets the eye. Let's say you tutor a Goblin Engineer and put that artifact that you need in your hand. Buried Ruin puts that card into your hand, and that is an amazing value for just 2 mana. Any artifact that's been removed, let's say somebody did remove Staff of Domination, they were able to stop that combo. This brings it right back to your hand so you can recast it.
You reset right back to it.
Another one is Mutavault, simply due to the fact that you can create it and turn it into a goblin for 1 mana to help build up bodies for Krenko.
And what's really cool about that is, like, you don't have to, technically you don't pay any extra mana, because you play your land return, you tap it for the colorless, and then turn it into the goblin.
Yes.
Which is awesome.
That is an amazing value for what it is. It used to be a lot more expensive, but they've reprinted it quite a few times.
It's got, I'd say 3 or 4 reprints in the last year, which has been awesome for it.
Yes. Now, another one that is good for building up bodies is Den of the Bugbear. Basically, you just get more bodies and for Krenko, and that's just great value. And you can make it where it doesn't enter tapped, so it's also a great red mana source. A newer add to this deck would be Barbarian Ring. It's a good way to just kind of machine gun out a creature if you need it. But it's just a great mana source as well. Now it does do 1 damage to you, so it's a little bit iffy. But all in all, I think it's a good add for this deck.
And since we're a commander and likes a resource, definitely not too terrible. Especially if you don't care cards about like ad nauseam or anything like that.
Correct. Another one, then this is simply Great Furnace is simply for the cards like what is Mox Opal that taps 3 artifacts. Eventually, I will be getting one for this deck. But this is also a good sack outlet for that Goblin Engineer or Goblin Welder. If you wanted to swap out and get a Goblin, an artifact card from your graveyard to your hand, this is a great way to get that out. And last but not least, Goblin Burrows. It taps for a colorless, but it also builds up one of your goblins. And I think that in itself, it's not a high valued card, But I do love the card simply because it's one of the only goblin-centered lands, especially from the Onslaught set.
Tribal All-Star set with Onslaught.
Yeah, and this is just, I think, a great include in most goblin decks.
Alrighty, so I like to know my videos the same way. I like to know my videos give me a compliment. I've played Magic to you probably, what, year and a half, 2 years?
Yes.
And you build a lot of decks. However, I think it's a competition between you and our buddy Eugene for the most foil out decks possible.
Yeah, that's definitely a thing that me and Logan have to where we just foil out our decks, and I've been trying to outfoil him, but he's been going to more conventions, and his decks have become impressively foiled out.
Yes, they have.
His Gwenna deck, which eventually he'll probably do a deck.
Oh yeah, that's the goal. I gotta get Eugene on the channel to do a Gwenna deck tag because that is his like pride and joy of Magic.
Correct, and I think that is an amazing thing to do, and it's if you have a pet deck, that's just the way to go. You got to foil out your pet decks.
So then, what do you think about the deck overall? There's things we wish Krenko had that it doesn't have access to, or
there are a few things I would like to add to the deck eventually. Of course, the big expensive mana rocks, but if I add those in, I'm a little worried that it might be a little too overpowered, especially for more casual high-powered pods. But I think within our meta, I think that would be fine. Especially when you have Gwenna or
Unctis, Winota, Prosper,
yeah, and
Tali.
I think, especially a Tali, I think with that it will be fine. And then of course there's a few other goblin creatures I just have not gotten yet, such as Sensation Gorger. It virtually allows you to wheel every turn, and that's amazing. So I think there are a few things that eventually I will upgrade the deck more, but as of right now, I'm very happy with it. It's definitely my favorite deck, and it's my pride and joy when it comes to Magic.
All right, man. Well, like I said before, I really do appreciate you coming on today and talking about your deck. I also really do appreciate you letting us play and film Magic at your house all the time. It's been a big help for getting us all started. Anything to say to everyone else before we get out of here?
Yeah, well, thank you guys for watching the Deck Tech. It's much appreciated. It's something that I love and enjoy, and I love the game. And please like and subscribe to the channel.
Kale's Moxos link will be in the description of the video. If you have any questions for him, you can comment on his Moxos page, or you can comment on the video itself, and I'll do my best to get them to you. That's all. That's Shane and Caleb for the Chain Down GG. We'll see y'all later.